Hey, before we dive in, if you're into stories that'll keep you up at night, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Comment below, where are you watching from, and what are you doing right now? Alright, let's get into it. The smell hasn't left my clothes. 3 weeks later, and I can still catch it when I turn my head too quickly. Iron and ozone, like lightning striking a slaughterhouse. My apartment reeks of it. I've washed these jeans 4 times. The scent clings to the fabric the same way the memory clings to my skull, unwilling to let go, refusing to fade. I need to tell someone. Not because I think you'll believe me, but because if I don't get this out, I'm going to lose what's left of my mind. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I worked at a place most people will never see, never hear about, and definitely never enter. It's called The Threshold, though that name isn't on any sign. There's no neon, no advertisement, no storefront that stands out.
You find it when you need to, and if you need to, then you're already part of a world that exists in the margins of reality. The Threshold is a 24-hour shop that caters to a very specific clientele. Demon hunters restocking blessed ammunition. Witches looking for rare herbs that don't grow on Earth anymore.
Creatures wearing human skin shopping for charms to maintain their disguises. Sometimes angels, actual angels, stopping by for information or ancient texts. The rule was absolute and unbreakable. Everyone was welcome. Good, evil, neutral, it didn't matter. The Threshold was sacred ground, a place where the war between light and darkness paused. Temporary ceasefire, neutral territory. The beings who enforced that neutrality were called the Watchers. 3 of them, always 3. Standing guard in the spaces between spaces. You couldn't see them unless they wanted you to, but you felt them. The air hummed with their presence, a constant low vibration that made your teeth ache if you focused on it too long. They kept the peace. If anyone started trouble, if a vampire tried to feed on a hunter, if a demon attempted to possess a customer, the Watchers dealt with it, instantly, brutally. I'd only seen them intervene once before, 2 years into my job. A rogue werewolf got aggressive near the warding stones. The Watchers materialized, and the wolf was gone before it hit the ground. Not dead, just gone, removed, erased from that moment. I'd been working there for 5 years, started when I was 23, desperate for rent money and willing to overlook the strangeness in exchange for a paycheck that never bounced. The owner, a man I'd met exactly once during my interview, someone named Holloway with gray eyes that looked through you instead of at you, explained the rules. Keep your head down. Don't ask questions. Treat everyone the same. The Watchers handle problems. It was the easiest job I'd ever had, once you got past the existential terror of realizing that everything you thought you knew about the world was wrong. The night it happened started like any other. I clocked in at 11 p.m., relieving Garrett from the day shift. Garrett was in his 60s, a former priest who'd seen too much and stopped asking God for answers. He nodded at me, grabbed his coat from behind the counter, and left without a word. That was normal. Nobody who worked at the Threshold was chatty. We all carried our own weight, our own reasons for being there. The store stretched further back than the building's exterior suggested, aisles branching off into sections that shouldn't geometrically fit but somehow did. Shelves stocked with items that ranged from mundane to impossible. Candles that burned with black flames. Knives that hummed. Bottles of water from rivers that dried up centuries ago. An entire section devoted to binding contracts, the parchment made from something that definitely wasn't animal hide. I did my opening routine. Checked the wards along the entrance. Glowing sigils carved into the doorframe, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Restocked the counter display of basic charms and talismans. Brewed coffee in the back room, the only normal thing in the entire building. The coffee maker was a cheap machine from a big box store, and that tiny piece of ordinary reality kept me grounded. The first customer arrived at 11:47 p.m., Tobias Crane. Regular. He'd been coming in for as long as I'd worked there, maybe longer. Late 50s, weathered face, hands scarred from decades of fighting things that shouldn't exist. He was a hunter, one of the old school types who'd learned the trade from his father, who'd learned it from his father. Tobias didn't hunt for glory or money. He hunted because someone had to, because the alternative was letting innocent people die. "Evening," he said, voice rough from too many cigarettes and too much screaming. "Tobias, usual?" "Yeah. And throw in some iron filings." The blessed kind. Running low. I grabbed his usual order from the back. Silver bullets, pre-consecrated, packed in a wooden box lined with velvet. The iron filings were on aisle 3, next to the salt circles and graveyard dirt. I rang him up, and he paid in cash. He always paid in cash. Nobody who shopped here used credit cards. "Quiet tonight?" he asked, glancing around the empty store. "So far, still early." He nodded, pocketed his items, and paused at the door. "You ever think about getting out?" The question surprised me. Out of what? This. He gestured vaguely at the store, at everything it represented. "Find a normal job, normal life." I didn't know how to answer that. The truth was, I'd stopped believing in normal years ago. "I don't think there's a way out, Tobias. Not once you've seen what we've seen." He looked at me for a long moment, something sad and understanding in his expression. "Yeah, I suppose you're right." Then he left, and I was alone again. The next hour passed slowly. I restocked shelves, organized inventory in the back, checked my phone even though there was never any signal inside the threshold. Time moved strangely here. Sometimes an 8-hour shift felt like 20 minutes. Other times it dragged like wading through mud. At 1:15 a.m., Vera walked in. She was young, maybe 19, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and paint-stained fingers. A witch, self-taught, still learning. She came in every week for supplies, herbs, crystals, occasionally a grimoire if she'd saved enough money. I liked her. She was earnest, curious, and she always said, "Thank you." In a place where most customers were hardened by violence and trauma, her softness stood out. "Hi," she said, offering a small smile. "Do you have any white sage? The real stuff, not the store-bought bundles." "Aisle 7, middle shelf, got a fresh shipment yesterday." "Perfect." She wandered off, and I heard her humming softly to herself as she browsed. She returned a few minutes later with the sage and a small vial of lavender oil. "Just these tonight." I rang her up. "Big ritual coming up." "Just cleansing my apartment. Feels heavy lately, you know, like something's watching." A chill ran through me, the kind that had nothing to do with temperature. "You might want to add some protection charms. We've got new ones in stock, stronger than the last batch." She bit her lip, considering. "I'm kind of broke this week." I glanced around, then slipped a small iron charm across the counter. "On the house. Just this once." Her eyes widened. "Are you sure? I don't want to get you in trouble." "It's fine. Call it insurance." She took the charm, clutching it like it was made of gold. "Thank you. Really. Be careful out there, Vera." "Always am." She left, and the store fell silent again. That's when I felt it. A change in the air. Subtle at first, like the barometric pressure dropping before a storm. The fluorescent lights flickered just once, barely noticeable. But I noticed. I'd been here long enough to recognize when something was wrong. I stood behind the counter, every nerve suddenly alert. The door opened. He didn't walk in so much as manifest, like reality bent around him and then snapped back into place. Tall, maybe 6'5", wearing a long coat that looked like it was woven from shadows. His face was pale, angular, almost sculptural in its perfection, but his eyes were wrong. They reflected light like broken glass, fractured and sharp, and when he blinked, it was too slow, too deliberate. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. "Good evening," he said, and his voice dragged, each word pulled through gravel and ash. I forced myself to respond. "Welcome to the threshold. How can I help you?" He moved toward the counter with footsteps that made no sound. "I'm looking for something specific, something I believe you have in stock." "I can check our inventory. What do you need?" His smile was a thin slash across his face. A blade, forged from the bones of a fallen archangel. My blood turned to ice. I'd heard rumors about that knife, whispers among the more dangerous customers. Stories passed in hushed tones. A weapon so powerful, so fundamentally wrong, that even owning it was considered a violation of cosmic law. I'd never seen it, didn't know if it really existed. But if it did, selling it would shatter the balance that kept the threshold safe. "I'm not sure You do." His eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't look away. "I can feel it. Somewhere in this place, buried deep, protected. But it's here." "Even if it was, I couldn't—" "My name," he interrupted, "is Elandiel. Perhaps you've heard of me." I hadn't, but the way he said it, the weight behind those syllables made it clear I should have. "There is a war coming," he continued, voice soft and terrible. "A war in the highest realms. The throne of paradise is unstable, and I intend to claim it. To do that, I need power. All the power I can gather, even if it comes from the dead. The Watchers won't allow—" "The Watchers," he said, and his smile widened, "are about to learn that some rules were made to be broken." The lights went out, and then the screaming began. The darkness lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I heard everything. The hum of the refrigeration units in the back room dying. The emergency exit sign crackling as its bulb shattered. My own heartbeat, thundering so loud it felt like it would crack my ribs from the inside. And underneath it all, a sound that didn't belong. A low, resonant tone that vibrated through the floor, through the walls, through my bones. Then the lights came back. But they weren't the same lights. The fluorescent fixtures now glowed with a blue-white radiance that hurt to look at directly, cold and surgical. And standing between me and Elandiel were 3 figures that hadn't been there before. The Watchers. I'd felt their presence for 5 years, but I'd only seen them once. Seeing them now up close was like staring into the sun. They were humanoid in shape, but that's where the similarity ended. Their skin, if you could call it that, looked like it was carved from alabaster, smooth and seamless, without pores or imperfections. They wore no clothes, but their bodies were covered in geometric patterns that shifted and moved, symbols that my brain couldn't quite process. Wings, not feathered, but made of pure golden light, spread from their backs, tips nearly brushing the ceiling. Their faces were blank. No eyes, no mouths, just smooth expanses of white stone. And yet, I knew they were looking directly at Elandiel. "This one has violated the covenant," one of them said, though I couldn't tell which. The voice came from everywhere at once, layered and harmonic, like a choir speaking in perfect unison. "The balance must be maintained. The sanctuary must remain inviolate." Elandiel tilted his head, studying them with something that might have been amusement. "The covenant was written by cowards. The sanctuary protects nothing but stagnation." "You will leave," the Watcher said. "Now." "No," Elandiel replied softly. "I don't think I will." What happened next occurred so fast that my memory of it feels fragmented, like scenes from a film played out of sequence. Elandiel raised one hand. The nearest Watcher lunged forward, moving with impossible speed, one hand extended toward Elandiel's throat. Elandiel's fingers closed into a fist. The Watcher stopped mid-motion, suspended in the air. Its body began to tremble, vibrating so violently that the golden light of its wings flickered and dimmed. And then, God, I can still hear it, a sound like stone cracking under pressure, sharp and final. The Watcher split down the middle. Not cut, not torn. Split, like something had reached inside and pulled it apart from within. Its 2 halves fell away from each other, hitting the floor with wet, heavy thuds that shouldn't have come from something made of light and stone. Golden ichor, thick and luminous, spread across the tiles, steaming where it touched the ground. The smell hit me immediately. Burned sugar and copper, sweet and metallic, coating the back of my throat until I gagged. The other two watchers moved simultaneously, flanking Elandiel from both sides. One grabbed his left arm, the other his right, their hands burning where they made contact, smoke rising from his coat. Elandiel laughed. It was a sound devoid of humor, empty and cold. He twisted his arms, wrenching free from their grip with strength that shouldn't have been possible, and as he did, his form changed. His coat dissolved into smoke, revealing something underneath, skin covered in black marks, symbols that writhed and pulsed like living things. His eyes brightened, glowing with the same fractured light, and when he opened his mouth, I saw rows of teeth that were too sharp, too many. He grabbed the watcher on his left by the face. The watcher's scream was the worst sound I've ever heard. High and piercing, resonating at a frequency that made the windows crack and my vision blur. Elandiel's hand sank into the smooth alabaster, fingers digging through the surface like it was clay, and he pulled. The watcher's head came apart in chunks, fragments of white stone mixed with that glowing golden ichor, pieces scattering across the floor. The body collapsed, wings dissolving into sparks that faded before they hit the ground. 2 down. The last watcher didn't run. Maybe it couldn't. Maybe its purpose wouldn't allow retreat. It spread its wings wide, and the light intensified, becoming almost unbearable. The symbols on its body blazed, and the air around it warped, bending reality in ways that made my eyes water. Then it spoke, not in that layered choir voice, but in something older, deeper, a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. By the first covenant, by the word that binds all things, I cast you out. Elandiel moved faster than thought. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, the next his hand was inside the watcher's chest, buried up to the wrist in that impossible flesh. The watcher's voice cut off mid-syllable, replaced by a choking, gurgling sound. "Your words have no power here," Elandiel whispered. "Not anymore." He pulled his hand back, and in his grip was something that pulsed with faint light. Something that might have been a heart if hearts were made of crystallized starlight. The watcher reached for it weakly, its blank face somehow conveying desperation, pleading. Elandiel crushed it. The crystal shattered, fragments dissolving into nothing, and the watcher fell. Its wings crumbled, light fading, until all that remained was an empty shell of alabaster that cracked and powdered on impact. 3 seconds, that's all it took. 3 beings that had maintained the balance of the threshold for who knows how long, gone. Reduced to broken stone and cooling ichor. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles ached, and my mind kept trying to reboot, to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The Watchers were absolute. They were the enforcers, the unbreakable rule. Elandiel turned toward me, his form slowly shifting back to something more human, the marks on his skin fading beneath his reforming coat. "Now," he said pleasantly, as if he'd just completed a minor inconvenience. "Where were we?" That's when I heard the door behind me, the employee entrance, slam open. Tobias burst through, shotgun already raised, face twisted in fury and fear. "Get down!" he roared at me. I dropped behind the counter as the first blast went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The shot, silver and blessed I knew, hit Elandiel's center mass, enough force to stagger him back a step. Just one step. "Tobias, don't!" I started, but he was already firing again, pumping round after round into Elandiel, each impact tearing holes in the coat, in the flesh beneath, golden ichor mixing with something darker, redder. Elandiel raised one hand, almost lazily, and Tobias froze. The shotgun fell from his hands. Clattering on the floor, his eyes went wide, mouth opening in a silent scream, and his body lifted off the ground, suspended by nothing, held by invisible force. "Brave," Elandiel observed. "Foolish, but brave." Tobias's chest caved in. I heard it, the sound of ribs snapping, collapsing inward like cardboard under pressure. Blood poured from his mouth, running down his chin, and his eyes. God. His eyes were still aware, still conscious, knowing what was happening to him. Elandiel flicked his wrist, and Tobias flew backward, slamming into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. He slid down, leaving a red smear, and didn't move again. I tasted bile, hot and acidic. The front door burst open, more customers, 3 of them, drawn by the sounds of violence, by the breaking of the sanctuary. I recognized one, a thin man with tattoos covering every visible inch of skin, a warlock named Vincent, who'd been coming here for years. The other 2 I didn't know, but they moved like fighters, like people who'd survived the darkness before. They saw the bodies, saw the ichor, saw Elandiel standing in the center of it all. Vincent's hands began to glow with sickly green light, energy coalescing around his fingers. Everyone out. Now. Elandiel looked at him, just looked. Vincent's spell guttered and died. The tattoos on his arms began to smoke, the ink burning from the inside out, and he screamed, clawing at his skin as the protective wards he'd spent years carving into his flesh turned against him. He collapsed, convulsing, and within seconds, he stopped moving. The other 2 ran. They made it maybe 10 feet before Elandiel gestured, and the shelving units on either side of aisle 4 toppled inward, crushing them beneath wood and glass and ancient relics. I heard their screams, brief and sharp, then silence. I was still crouched behind the counter, every muscle locked, breathing in short, panicked gasps. My vision tunneled, the edges going dark, and some distant part of my brain recognized that I was going into shock. The employee door opened again, slower this time. Vera stepped through, her face pale, eyes wide. She must have been in the back room, maybe organizing the herb storage like she sometimes did to make a few extra dollars. She saw the carnage, the bodies, the golden ichor pooling across the floor. "What?" she started, voice tiny and lost. Elandiel turned toward her. "No," I heard myself say, standing up without thinking, without any plan. "Leave her alone." Elandiel regarded me with something that might have been curiosity. "Why?" "She's not part of this. She's just a kid." "Everyone here is part of this," he replied. "By virtue of existing in this place, by accepting the covenant, you all chose a side. She didn't choose anything. She just wants to learn to..." Vera's hands began to glow. Not green like Vincent's magic, but white gold, pure and bright. Her voice came out steady, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Binding of the 7 seals, by the light that stands against the void, I cast..." Elandiel moved. He was in front of her before the spell could finish, one hand closing around her throat. Vera's eyes bulged, the light around her hands sputtering and dying, and she clawed at his arm, desperate, terrified. "Admirable," Elandiel said softly. "You have potential. In another life, you might have been formidable." He squeezed. The snap was sickeningly loud. Vera went limp, and he let her fall, her body crumpling to the floor like a discarded puppet. Her eyes were still open, still reflecting that terrible fractured light, and I couldn't look away, couldn't process that she was gone, just like that, erased in a moment. I don't remember starting to cry, but I felt the tears on my face, hot and useless. Elandiel walked toward me, stepping over Vera's body, his footsteps silent on the blood-slicked floor. The store was a graveyard now, littered with the broken and the dead, the sanctuary transformed into an abattoir. He stopped on the other side of the counter, leaning forward slightly, his fractured eyes meeting mine. "Now," he said, voice gentle and patient, "about that blade." My voice came out as a whisper. "If I give it to you, you'll leave? Perhaps. Or perhaps I'll kill you anyway. But if you refuse, I will absolutely kill you. Slowly. And then I'll tear this place apart until I find it myself." He smiled, that thin slash across his face. "The choice, such as it is yours." I thought about running, about trying to fight, about refusing, about dying with some shred of dignity. But I looked at Tobias's body against the wall, at Vera crumpled on the floor, at the Watchers reduced to rubble and ichor, at Vincent and the others dead for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I knew that dignity was a luxury I couldn't afford. "The vault," I said, my voice hollow. "It's in the vault. Show me." I moved on autopilot, my body going through motions while my mind fractured into 1,000 screaming pieces. I walked around the counter, stepping carefully over the pooling ichor, avoiding looking at the bodies because if I looked too long, I'd collapse. The vault entrance was hidden behind a shelf in the back room, concealed by a glamour that made it invisible to anyone who didn't know the specific pattern to dispel it. I traced the sigil in the air with shaking fingers, and the shelf shimmered, revealing a heavy iron door covered in engravings. "Open it," Elandiel commanded. I placed my hand on the door, and it recognized me, locks clicking open one by one. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "After you," he said. I descended into the vault, into the place I'd never been allowed to enter in 5 years of working here, the place where the threshold kept its most dangerous secrets. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was about to make everything so much worse. The stairs went down further than they should have. 30 steps, 40, 50. I lost count after a while. The temperature dropped with each step, my breath misting in the air, and the walls around us shifted from concrete to something older, rougher. Stone that looked hand-carved, covered in symbols I couldn't read, but that made my eyes ache when I tried to focus on them. Elandiel followed 3 steps behind, silent except for the faint rustling of his coat. I could feel his presence like weight on my back, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. "How long has this vault existed?" he asked, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow space. "I don't know. I've never been down here. But you know what's inside. Only rumors. Stories from other employees, things overheard." My foot caught on an uneven step, and I grabbed the wall to steady myself. The stone was ice cold, burning my palm. "They say Holloway built this place over something that was already here, something much older." "Holloway?" Elandiel spoke the name like he was tasting it. "The architect of this little sanctuary. I wonder if he anticipated this moment. If somewhere, in his careful planning, he accounted for the possibility of complete failure." We reached the bottom. The vault opened into a circular chamber maybe 30 feet across. The walls were lined with alcoves, each one containing an artifact sealed behind barriers of light, wards more complex and powerful than anything upstairs. I saw weapons that pulsed with malevolent energy, books bound in materials that squirmed when I looked at them too long, containers holding things that whispered even through their seals. But in the center of the room, on a pedestal of black stone, rested a single object under a dome of crystalline force: a knife. It was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 8 inches long, blade and handle forged from bone that had yellowed with age. Engravings covered every surface, names maybe, or prayers, worn smooth by time. The bone itself seemed to generate its own light, faint and sickly pale, pulsing in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. Looking at it made my chest tight, like invisible hands were squeezing my lungs. "There," I said, pointing with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. "That's what you want." Elandiel stepped past me, moving toward the pedestal with something approaching reverence. He stopped just outside the barrier, studying the knife, and for the first time since he'd entered the threshold, his expression showed something genuine. Not triumph or satisfaction, but something deeper. Longing, grief. "Do you know whose bones these are?" he asked softly. "No." His name was Adriel. Elandiel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He paused, and when he continued, there was something raw in his tone. "He was my brother. Not by blood, but by choice. We stood together in the first wars, when light and darkness were still learning how to hate each other. I said nothing, not trusting my voice. He fell, Elandiel continued. Not to corruption, not to pride. He fell because he questioned, because he saw the cruelty in the divine plan and refused to be complicit. They cast him down, tore his wings from his back, and when he died, alone, broken, unmade, they took his remains and forged them into this, a weapon, a warning, a monument to obedience. His hand hovered just above the barrier, not quite touching. I tried to retrieve his body. I fought through armies, burned entire realms, but I was too late. By the time I found where they'd hidden him, he was already this. Already transformed into something useful for their purposes. Then why? I started, then stopped. Why do I want it? He looked at me, and in his fractured eyes, I saw something that might have been pain. Because it's all I have left of him. Because if I must wage war on heaven itself, I want him with me. Even like this. Even as a tool of violence. The honesty in his voice unsettled me more than any threat had. This wasn't a monster. This was something far more dangerous. Someone with a reason. Someone who'd loved and lost and decided that the entire cosmic order needed to burn because of it. How do I disable the barrier? He asked. I stared at the pedestal, at the complex weaving of protective energy. I don't know. There's probably a mechanism, some kind of key, or... Find it. I searched the chamber, checking the alcoves, looking for anything that might serve as a control. My hands shook as I examined each artifact, each sealed container, acutely aware that Elandiel watched my every move. Then I saw it. On the far wall, partially hidden by shadow, was a small alcove containing a crystal sphere. Inside the sphere, suspended in what looked like liquid glass, was a single feather. White gold, pristine, radiating soft light. A watcher's feather. Understanding hit me like cold water. The barrier could only be disabled by one of the guardians. By one of the beings Elandiel had just destroyed upstairs. It requires a watcher's essence, I said, my voice flat. You can't get to it. Elandiel moved to the alcove, studying the sphere. Then he looked down at his hands, at the golden ichor still staining his fingers. Can't I? He pressed his palm against the sphere. The liquid inside began to roil, darkening from clear to amber to deep crimson. The feather dissolved, consumed by the corrupted essence, and the sphere cracked, then shattered, fragments falling to the stone floor. The barrier around the pedestal flickered and died. Elandiel approached the knife slowly, almost hesitantly. He reached out, fingers hovering above the bone handle, and I saw his hand trembling. Not with fear, with anticipation, with emotion too complex to name. He touched it. The reaction was immediate and violent. Light exploded from the blade, pure white tinged with gold, and Elandiel screamed. Not in pain, in something else. Something that sounded like recognition, like reunion. The light wrapped around him, tendrils of radiance piercing his flesh, and his form began to change again. The shadows that clung to him burned away. The marks on his skin blazed, and then faded. And his eyes, those fractured, broken eyes, suddenly cleared, becoming whole, becoming almost human. For just a moment, I saw what he must have been before he fell, before grief and rage twisted him into what he'd become. Then, the moment passed. Elandiel lifted the knife, and the light condensed, folding into the blade until it glowed with contained power. He held it up, examining it, and a smile, genuine this time, soft and sad, crossed his face. "Hello, old friend," he whispered. "I'm sorry it took so long." That's when I felt it. A presence, multiple presences. Not above us in the store, but below, deeper in the earth, in spaces that shouldn't exist. Ancient and vast, and suddenly, terribly aware. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the walls, creeping upward from the floor, and the artifacts in the alcoves began to vibrate, their seals cracking under pressure that came from within and without simultaneously. "What did you do?" I whispered. Elandiel's expression shifted, the smile fading. "I took something that was sealed, something that held more than just a weapon." He looked around the chamber, at the spreading frost, at the shaking walls. The knife wasn't the only thing imprisoned here. The floor beneath us split, not cracked, split, reality itself tearing open like paper, revealing darkness underneath that had depth and dimension and something moving inside it. The edges of the tear glowed with the same sickly light as the artifacts, and from the darkness came a sound that made my bones ache. Breathing. Something was breathing down there. Something enormous. "Run," Elandiel said simply. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the stairs, legs pumping, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. Behind me, I heard Elandiel following, heard the floor continuing to break apart, heard that breathing growing louder, closer. Something rose from the darkness. I didn't look back, couldn't look back, but I felt it. A presence so massive, so fundamentally wrong, that my mind refused to process it. The air pressure changed, becoming crushing, and the temperature swung from freezing to burning in seconds. We hit the stairs running, taking them 3 at a time. The walls shook, stone crumbling, and behind us came the sound of something ascending, something dragging itself up from depths that predated the threshold, predated the city above, maybe predated human civilization entirely. "What is that thing?" I gasped. "The original tenant," Elandiel replied, somehow not out of breath. "Before Holloway built his sanctuary, before anyone thought to create neutral ground, something lived here. Something they couldn't kill, so they buried it, sealed it beneath layers of protection and prayer. And the knife was part of the seal. The knife was the keystone. Remove it and..." The stairs behind us exploded upward. Something massive and writhing burst through the stone appendages. I couldn't call them arms or tentacles or anything familiar, reaching for us. I saw teeth, rows and rows of them, spiraling inward like the mouth of some deep-sea horror. I saw eyes, hundreds of them, blinking independently, focusing on us with ancient hunger. Elandiel turned, knife in hand, and slashed. The blade cut through one of the appendages, and where it touched, the flesh burned, turning to ash. The creature shrieked, the sound resonating at frequencies that made my ears bleed, and recoiled. "Keep moving!" Elandiel shouted. We burst through the door at the top of the stairs, stumbling back into the storeroom. The floor was still covered in bodies, in ichor and blood, but now it trembled, everything trembling, as whatever was below fought to break free. "The building won't hold," I said, stating the obvious. "No," Elandiel agreed, "it won't." He moved toward the front door, then stopped, turning back to look at the carnage he'd created. At Vera's body, at Tobias slumped against the wall, at the broken remains of the Watchers. For just a second I saw something cross his face, not quite regret, but acknowledgement, the recognition of cost. "They deserved better," he said quietly. "Then why?" "Because I needed this." He held up the knife, the bone blade still glowing faintly. "Because in the war that's coming, sentiment is a luxury I can't afford. Because I chose this path a long time ago, and there's no turning back now." The floor cracked, a massive fissure opening near the back wall. Something dark and glistening pushed through, and the smell hit. Rot and brine, and something chemical, burning. Elandiel walked to the door, pulled it open. Outside, the night was quiet, normal, oblivious to the horror happening inside the threshold. He paused on the threshold, and I realized the irony wasn't lost on him. "You should leave," he said without looking back. "This place is finished. By morning it'll collapse completely, and whatever's underneath will be free. I'd suggest being far away when that happens." What about... I gestured at the bodies, at the destruction. What about them? He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his profile. They're gone. You're not. That's the only thing that matters now. I helped you. I gave you what you wanted. You survived. Be grateful for that. And now what? You take that knife and storm heaven? Start your war? Yes. The simplicity of the answer chilled me more than any threat could have. The balance is broken, Elandiel continued. Not just here, but everywhere. The sanctuary was a microcosm, a reflection of a larger truce that's been dying for centuries. I didn't break it. I just exposed how fragile it always was. So this was all for nothing. They died for nothing. They died because they were in the way. Because neutrality is impossible when the universe itself is choosing sides. You can pretend to stand apart, to be uninvolved, but eventually the war comes to you anyway. He finally turned to face me fully. You were always going to have to choose. I simply forced the timeline. Something in his words struck me. What do you mean, choose? He smiled, that thin, terrible smile. You really think you survived by accident? That I allowed you to live out of mercy? Ice flooded my veins. When you touched the vault door, when you opened the seal, you became part of it, connected to it. The creature below, the old tenant, it's awake now, and it knows your essence, your signature. He gestured with the knife, casual and final. You're marked. Whether you want to be or not, you're part of this now. No, you have two options. Run, hide, try to live whatever normal life you can before the mark draws things to you. Hunters, demons, worse. Or you accept what you've become and use it. Find others like you. Prepare for what's coming. I'm not like you. Not yet. But give it time. Give it blood and fear, and the slow realization that everything you believed about the world was a comfortable lie. He turned away again, stepping out into the night. The war is here. Pretending otherwise won't save you. He walked away, disappearing into the darkness between streetlights, and I was left standing in the doorway of the threshold, surrounded by death, feeling something writhe beneath my feet. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in ichor, golden and dark, and underneath the stains, I saw something new. Faint lines, barely visible, running along my palms. Symbols I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The mark. Behind me, the building groaned. Walls cracked. The creature below pushed harder against its weakening prison. I ran into the street, into the night, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I had to move. Behind me, I heard the threshold collapse, walls crumbling inward, the sound of shattering glass and breaking stone, and underneath it all, a roar, triumphant and hungry. I kept running until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed in an alley 3 blocks away. I lay there, gasping, staring up at the sky, at stars that suddenly seemed cold and distant and indifferent. My phone was still in my pocket, miraculously undamaged. I pulled it out with shaking hands and saw the time, 3:47 a.m. Less than 5 hours since Elandiel had walked through the door. 5 hours to destroy everything. I wanted to call someone. Police, paramedics, anyone. But what would I say? How could I explain bodies drained of life, golden ichor, creatures from beneath the earth? I couldn't. So I sat there in the dark, watching the distant glow of emergency lights converging on the collapsed building, and I felt the mark on my palms pulse in rhythm with something deep underground. Elandiel was right. I'd survived. But survival came with a price I was only beginning to understand. The balance was broken, the sanctuary had fallen, and somewhere in the ruins, mixed with Tobias's blood and Vera's last breath, and the shattered remnants of beings that once enforced cosmic law, was the proof that neutrality was a myth. There was no standing apart anymore. There was only the choice of which side to fight for when the war inevitably came. And as I sat in that alley, feeling the mark burn beneath my skin, watching the sky begin to lighten with the approach of dawn, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I'd already chosen. The moment I opened that vault, the moment I handed over the knife, the moment I prioritized my survival over everything else, I'd made my choice. I just hadn't admitted it yet. 3 weeks later, I'm still running, still trying to find others who bear similar marks, who survived similar encounters, still trying to understand what I've become. But I know one thing with absolute certainty. Elandiel will return. The war he spoke of is coming, spreading like infection from the highest realms down to our mundane reality. And when it arrives, when the final battle between light and darkness consumes everything we know, I'll be ready. Not because I want to be, but because I don't have a choice anymore. None of us do. The balance is broken, and we're all complicit in what comes next.